Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to take on the moon missions again. Out of massive request from you guys. My two first videos on this, I think episode 26 and somewhere around the 160s of season 2, I did a second version of it where I figured out some more stuff for myself. Those two videos have exploded, and just recently, in the last 6 months or so, and so people are like, man, could you please talk about this some more? And I would be happy to talk about it, because the lunacy of the whole thing is, it ebbs and flows, right? If you want to probably find the people that are actively conspiring to keep the moon hoax active in our minds, you need to look at anyone who was involved in movies since the moon mission that are pro-moon. Look at everyone who was the executive producers. Look at the people who were financing it. Those are your current forces that are keeping up the lie. Certain actors that have been accused of being pedophiles, of buying little girls. They'll be the lead actor in the movie because they're so fucking co-opted. They're so controlled by their addictions. They get stuffed into these films. I'll just let you do your own exploration. This year we have a new film, and because of copyright and all this other lunacy fucking going on until our president starts to lay down some fucking laws and say people can talk about whatever the fuck they want to talk about, I'll be a little referential. This is 2018. So a new moon movie comes out, and the big fucking controversy is they won't put in Buzz Aldrin pounding in the American flag because it was one of the biggest fucking reveals that they were on a movie set. You have actors inside these astronaut outfits with this reflective glass such that you can't see their face. Of course, they got a fucking excuse for it. They're wearing environmental packs that don't actually have anything in them, so they're not getting fed necessarily oxygen. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, not sure. But they're hot as fuck inside those suits, just like anyone who's ever played a character in some Disney theme park. They sweat their balls off inside these things. It's 1969. This is a fast build. This is taking suits that aren't necessarily built for a hoax, putting them on a movie set, and then you got to chill it down. You have to chill it down. So you run gigantic air conditioners. And so when the actor Buzz, not Buzz Aldrin, but the CIA guy, who's putting this thing in this fucking soil, either in the desert, in some crazy soundstage, which is my personal opinion, the flag is flopping left and right like crazy. No atmosphere on the moon. And of course the fucking geniuses at NASA said, oh, Buzz hit the flagpole with his foot. No evidence of that. Or shook it with his hand and it was going up. The kinetic energy was going up, transferring 1,000% fucking augmentation to the original force, meaning you touch it with your fingertip and it's a fucking, atom bomb at the end. And this flag's just fucking going crazy. Absolutely fucking absurd. And any of you who've ever played a video game, and a lot of you baby boomers never even played Donkey Kong, for Christ's sake, but you got all this fucking authority about what happened and what didn't happen. We have physics engines now inside of computer games that are 1,000% correct. The only thing that isn't correct is if we have to soften the physics because the human being can't control the game, such as a racing game or some sort of game that requires that you really have a 5-sense body to deal with the objects. So programming in true physics is easy. Kinetic transfer of energy, easy. Potential energy, easy. But what's been happening recently, since these two moon videos of mine have been picked up again by somebody, I don't know who, I get this request to cover this topic a lot, but also I'm getting a really unified comment. And it's bizarre because the comment's been going on and on and on for 6 months. And the 6-month comment is, once I stepped back and looked at this, I looked at the lunar lander, I looked at the Apollo capsule, I looked at the fact that they want me to believe that a bullet head object, right, the lunar module, the capsule that comes back down, somehow will turn around and glide in on its butt, as if there's any ability and aerodynamic history for that to occur. For a bullet to essentially be traveling straight towards your face with the pointy end towards your head, and it just because you fire a little retro rocket, it turns around and uses its ass. Yeah, that's possible. So we have some super bad science. Super bad science. And it was really just sort of science fiction when they were developing this whole mission to the moon. It was science fiction. Now, symbolically, these steps need to occur. Probably a multi-stage rocket if we don't have fucking anti-gravity, which I'm sure we do, someplace locked away. But if we have to use a propellant, we're going to have to maybe start from a space station, move our ass over to the moon. We're going to have to achieve an orbit. We're going to have to put something down there. It's going to have to get its ass back into space. And it's going to have to find propellant to get home. And it's a long journey, people. It's a long journey. Again, the space station averages 250 to 350, 100 miles up in the sky. Earth is 8,000 miles approximately across. And again, my analogy that you have to repeat to yourself and to your family is that if you took the average distance between the floor and an 8-foot ceiling, you flip it into metric to keep it easy, every centimeter is about 1,000 miles up. There's 237 centimeters to the top of the ceiling in your house. Every millimeter equals 100 miles. So, at best, we're about 3.5 millimeters off the fucking ground today. And they want you to believe in 1969 they were able to do it from 1969 to 1972. 7 missions, 6 that landed from the floor to the ceiling. Circle up there, land, have no fucking health problems whatsoever, come back and land, right? You have to be almost like an ice pick lobotomy patient to believe that that is possible. And the stupider that you are, the easier it is for you to believe. And that's the goddamn truth. And I'm really sorry about that. 1969, how many people in the world had technical jobs? How many people had technical things that they had to learn in order to be a part of society? A fraction. Not even 50% of the world was in a technical position. I would guess that the average person count and percentage of the Earth's surface that touched a computer on average or got into any like ISO-based, I don't even think ISO existed, I'm not sure, ISO-based manufacturing, Sigma 6 military project management methodology, 1-2% of the population of the world. So yeah, when this stuff's hitting the airwaves in 1969, of course everybody believes it. It is the most technical thing that they've ever seen. But today in 2018, how many people have touched a computer? How many people can program a computer in one way or another, right? How many people are familiar with ISO 9000 plus manufacturing techniques? I know someone who works for SpaceX. I know all kinds of technical people. And now it's a lot different to pump this crap down people's throats because people are starting to look at the whole cycle. And they understand when you want to do something simple like, hey, we're going to create smart volume for a television, but it doesn't exist yet. They know they're looking at a year, 2 years worth of research just to do something as silly as make some volume detection system, some average algorithm that can smooth all the sound out. But America went from almost having no rocketry to getting ourselves on the moon. Right. One of the big things that people are noticing is the Apollo lander is probably the silliest looking thing you've ever seen in your life. There's evidence that there's tent poles, like when you go down and buy a tent in 1968, some of the equipment that you would use to hold up tent together is on that unit. You got these frumpy fucking legs, and just because you cover it in reflective foil, all of a sudden it looks technical. The cabin isn't big enough for the astronauts. especially when they're fully inflated. I mean, one of the nephews of one of the astronauts measured the door and said, this isn't big enough for anyone to get it out of. How do you figure? One of them's just 24 inches in diameter. Can you imagine being a human body crawling through a 2-foot hole? You know your average hallway is 36 inches, folks. But now you're going to be strapped on with an inflated suit with a big giant environmental pack on the back. Oopsie. Now you got an astronaut that's nearly 3 feet wide, 3 feet thick. It's not going to fit through that hole. Oopsie. You really don't need any more evidence than one of these smoking guns to pull your head out of your ass and just go, well, I'm not sure exactly who did it, why they did it, but we didn't do it. I mean, the hoax got done, right? But Hollywood keeps a steady beat, don't they? They keep a steady beat of moon, hoax, revisionistic history bullshit, which technically should be illegal to be reported as news. Now, if you want to tell a fictional story about what if we had actually gone, that's great. But propagating something as the truth when it's true propaganda and lies to the people, shouldn't that be illegal? Shouldn't that be illegal? The one that burns my ass for anybody who's trying to say that we did go is they don't know anything about Project Orion. Project Orion was a mission launched inside of NASA to do several flights. I don't know if you call it a mission, but it's a division or something. A project, a plan to put human flesh through the Van Allen belts because no one could do it. Because the Van Allen belts are lethal, and they know they're lethal. They're lethal way before the 1,000 mile altitude mark where they are at their first full capacity. Now again, just like amperage in electricity, you could have 1 volt at 200 amps, and it's a lot more intense than 1 volt at 20 amps. It's the amount that flows over a particular unit of time. So when you position yourself in the Van Allen belts, especially at the poles, at the North Pole and the South Pole, the amperage is insane. Because that's where it's all coming out of, the top of the Earth, and it's all going back in the bottom of the Earth. Super fucking powerful. But of course they tell Joe Rogan they fucking steered the goddamn Saturn V through a hole in the North Pole, which has got to be the most ludicrous fucking thing I've ever heard on Coast to Coast in my fucking life. Oh, they did that, but they never put it in the history books? Mm-hmm. And because an artist draws the Van Allen belts as having a little hole at the top, they think there's actually a hole at the top? Sorry, folks, there ain't no hole at the top. And you couldn't make a right angle fucking turn to get through it even if there was one. We're just going to let it all hang out today. But what happens with Project Orion? They announce this thing, and immediately everyone with their head out of their ass and who knows that we didn't go to the moon goes, well, yeah, wow, amazing. They just admitted we didn't go to the moon. They just admitted it because they supposedly did this, again, 14 fucking times. In fact, even more than that, 16 times at least, maybe even 18 times. Anytime they go to the moon and circle and come back, even in a pre-Apollo 10, I think Apollo 8 did it too, something like that. They said they went through it and they survived. And a 1/4-inch thick aluminum capsule. Absolute bullshit. Because you wouldn't need Project Orion. If you did it, you wouldn't need it. So what's Project Orion do? They build a capsule. It looks like the Apollo capsule. Okay. Then they launch it unmanned first just to take sensor readings because they don't know kind of what they're getting into. Why don't they know what they're getting into? Would you lose the fucking data? Didn't even matter if you lose the data because they didn't talk about this belt existing back in the 60s, even though I think it was theorized to exist. But they push all these astronauts through it supposedly, and they all come back safe. The mission flies once, they take a bunch of sensor readings, and they cancel the project. Now imagine this. What if you put the capsule up there, and the readings are 0? It's totally not as lethal as they thought it was. No problem. Well, then you can just keep you could cancel the project and fly astronauts through it all the time. In fact, you could debunk right away the fact that the Van Allen belts have been sensationalized up in the pop culture of conspiracy on YouTube, but they actually have no force whatsoever. Meanwhile, all of the shit that comes from the sun, all these meteorites and everything that comes to the Earth gets fended off by this exact shield. I mean, it's a invisible electromagnetic shield that is so fucking powerful you can't even see the damn thing, that it fends off a 99 plus percentile rate of all solar radiation coming at Earth. Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Bart Sabrell, who I interviewed last season, the gentleman that made Funny Thing Happen on the Way to the Moon and Astronauts Gone Wild, 2 videos you have to see if you care about this whole movement, said that he went to NASA and said, can I have the data at least of the radiation readings from this Project Orion? And they said, nope, sir, it's a matter of national security. He said, what the fuck are you talking about? How much radiation is in the space is a national security issue? Are you kidding me? I suppose it's national security of how much radiation comes off the sun or the moon, right? You can't know how the universe is built because it's a matter of national security. What are you fucking kidding me? They didn't want to admit on paper that it's impossible to go through them with the current technology. Therefore, the moon missions definitely did not occur between 69 and 72. They don't want to admit it, but inadvertently, they did. They canceled the project. It's over. We know they didn't go. We do. But why keep beating it up? Well, I say because they keep trying to shove it down our throat. They make a movie, we make an episode on YouTube. They make another movie, we make another episode. We have to kill this shit. Because this idea that they can lie to us and we swallow it up has got to be destroyed. We already have almost zero accountability with government to the people, right? There's big change going on here in America. But the battle isn't won yet. So we must continue fighting. So now, what are the alternatives to lying about going to the moon? Because there's all kinds of different tactics that they talk about. Why did they lie? Well, we're in a Cold War with Russia. True. Someone might say, post all of this, well, this was to inspire kids to get into technology. All right, well, that definitely occurred. I haven't heard anyone put it directly on point besides myself, but I think that's the case. I'm sure people have made that point. For the financiers of the entire thing, it was a profit-based venture. I think in one of Bart's movies, he itemized it at the time. Again, you have to prorate the money up, but like almost $10 billion, basically, was invested into the Apollo missions. And that's the 10 years up to the Apollo missions plus the 3 years of the fake landings. Now, I think what's probably the case for most folks is most folks in the world have already made up their mind whether or not they're going to believe this bullshit or they're not going to believe this. What's interesting is I've seen a lot of buzz from Europe, which is very encouraging, that says something to the effect of, I think someone's even posted on our Locked Facebook page, you Americans are the only ones that believe that you went to the moon. I like that. I hope that's true. Because then we can address our own systemic illness. Now, for whatever reason, America innovates really well. We do. We invent tons of crap. We don't invent it all, but we don't do too bad. So why say that? Because one of the things I think we're trying to innovate and create and instill and protect, especially with Donald Trump in office, is truth in government. Some of you might roll your eyes and laugh your ass off at that statement. Believe me, I understand where your cynicism comes from. Yeah, maybe we're getting played. Maybe everyone's getting played. Who knows, right? But we're seeing an awful lot of super fucking evil people go down. From CEOs of Google to CEOs of film companies. Even the Pope is having a few problems these days. Lots of people are not running for office again. Lots of people were posing for selfies with ISIS leaders. So there's a movement going on that might actually help things like moon mission folks trying to figure out the truth. But I think at this stage, again, one of the coolest things you can do is just load up a picture of the Apollo 11 lander. Take a look at it. Just bring up a really good picture. And just look at it for a second and ask yourself, really? Is that it? Is that what you would design if you had to land on the fucking moon? Right? And why do I say it like that? Because at the time, we were only partially convinced that we knew what the moon was made out of. For all we knew, it was quicksand. For all we knew, again, it seems to hold its form, but what do we know? We supposedly put a 10,000 pound thrust engine on the bottom of this thing to blast down to keep us from, smacking into the surface really hard. But for what we knew, it was the loosest soil on the moon, and it would have flown away and dug a huge crater, and they would have been stuck in it. And they theorized that might occur. You see out the window the video of all that fucking soil swimming away from the bottom of the craft, but by the time it lands, all 5 legs, I think there's 5 legs, are dust free because they fucked up when they lowered it down onto the set. Isn't that funny? They made so many mistakes with Apollo 11, and Bart Sabral was so brilliant in figuring out that that's all he needed to go for was Apollo 11, that they hate it now. They hate having to cover up for these old mistakes. But what's happening today? Where's the space shuttle? Nah, it doesn't fly anymore, does it? What do you see out of NASA at all? At $60 million a day, and that's before JPL's budget. $60 million a day to keep NASA alive. Hey, I'm all for really cool research jobs, but there's not a single project in NASA that's going after the zero-point energy system. Don't you think they should fucking try to make that? Oh, right, we're on a petrodollar system, so we can't have nice things because we have to keep these elite cocksuckers in the world alive by selling a barrel of oil. Not a single project in the world. And I'm taking that from Dr. Stephen Greer from the Disclosure Project. He said it. And when he said it, I couldn't unhear it. You're absolutely right, sir. Why not? Now, I think he works for them. But he's got to say something to gain credibility with us, and I think that's a good one we shouldn't forget. So we don't have the shuttle anymore. We're not going to the moon anymore. What's happening? Well, everything's being split off into sub-companies like SpaceX. This weird fucking anomaly named Elon Musk, who, if there ever was a guy in public who looked like an absolutely persecuted MKUltra dude, it would be Elon Musk. A guy who is ever nervous, autistically brilliant, but he seems like he just comes out of a dungeon of absolute fucking mental and physical torture. It's like they clean up all the contusions and bruises and nicks and cuts, and they put him on TV. They put him on a stage to demonstrate a product, and he just fumbles through that fucking thing as if he's never been around people before. And maybe it's due to a true autistic nature of his mind. I'm sure he actually is autistic in a good way, in like the Rain Man way. Definitely not a dumb guy. But what is he? He's the tip of the spear. And unfortunately, I think that spear's got some poison in the tip. I'm not sure it's his fault. Is it ever any of these kids' faults who are put up there at the top? At least he's calling out pedophilia on a couple people. I think that's kind of cool. But now if you reduce NASA to a legal liability standpoint, having lied to the people and stolen money from a particular series of countries, the attorneys are going to say, okay, how do we get out of this problem? Well, I think pedophilia will help us understand how NASA's going to get out of this problem. Jimmy Savile died in the UK, having been one of the biggest child traffickers on planet Earth. But he got away scot-free. And how did he get away scot-free? He died, didn't he? All right. Well, what is NASA? NASA isn't a human being. I mean, technically on paper it is because it's a corporation. You have 2 layers of reality for a corporation. You've got the corporation itself, which is a piece of paper in some fucking vault somewhere. But then you have the heads of state of the organization that made the decisions at the time that the hoax or hoaxes were actually being perpetrated on the people. All right? So we need two things to occur. First and foremost, we need to stop the hoaxes at NASA, which is probably impossible at this point because of so many fucking lies that they tell. So many of the projects that they have are a complete bullshit. How could they stop? Seriously. They can't. But at least the severity and the expense of what they do can be slowed down a little bit, right? There's no Apollo mission sucking billions and billions of dollars out of the people. All right. But now the people that actually participated in these crimes have to die too. Or be so old that no one would touch them because they're, in hospice or whatever. Well, that certainly occurred. How many people are alive today that participated at NASA at any high decision level during the moon hoaxes? I would wager none. Werner von Braun died before 1980. And I would put money on the fact that however he died was orchestrated. Because he wasn't playing along anymore. I think he'd passed away in 78. That's just my hunch. So you take NASA and you divide it up into pieces. And of course it's been run by the clown organizations, the alphabet agencies for a long, long time. Its entire objective was to, move Nazis from Germany over to here through Project Paperclip, using the Dulles brothers as a nice agent to pull this off. Half of them go off to the alphabet agencies and half of them go off to NASA. Werner von Braun, who engineered the V-1 and V-2 rockets that killed the shit out of people indiscriminately, is in charge. He's cleansed in the eyes of the people. Right? Fucking unbelievable, right? It's like Hannibal fucking Lecter becoming a daycare teacher, some Boy Scout leader, after all the things that he did. But you take it up and you compartmentalize it just like the little pie piece in Trivial Pursuit, right? SpaceX takes part of it. The new Space Corps, I think is what they call it, the Trump organization, is a lot more significant than I think people understand. If QAnon is correct, and I believe that he is, and I believe that he's legit, and he's not a LARP, a live-action role-playing exercise, especially after John McCain's death. John McCain being put to death, should I say. This planet is utterly surrounded by intelligence agency satellites that are not operating under any rule of law. And they spy. There's also weapons up there. Weapons with all kinds of capabilities. Scary weapons, like directed energy weapons that can zap me in this backyard. They could zap me in this backyard and leave my clothing pretty much unscathed. And they can use the infinite power of the Van Allen belts to harvest electrons into power to run any one of these satellites that are up far enough, right? So you need an agency to go up there and clean up space, to commandeer and kill the big bird satellites up there that are doing heinous things, monitoring communications, intercepting everything. Everything that's beamed into the sky isn't necessarily beamed in a straight line, folks, right? It's a big conical shape. It's like an ice cream cone. At the base is the tip, and as it goes up, it starts to spread out like an ice cream cone. All you got to do is put a satellite in that little area, and you can get a copy of everything. You could invade a communication satellite's firmware and have a duplicate sent off to a different location. Encrypted even. I think we're in the very first stages of NASA being divided up into pieces and privatized into the private sector. And then NASA can go away, and with it will bury all of its crimes. And after some decades pass, we'll be able to tell our kids and tell the world that we actually didn't go to the moon. Because if anyone were to get there, they would look down and go, oh shit, nothing's there. Where they said they landed 6 times and put up flags and drove fucking Chryslers everywhere, those things don't exist up there. But I assure you of one thing. What they're going to attempt to do is to find believable locations and put all those objects up there. They're going to look at photographs and try to drive the car and generally the path that the car was recorded having driven in the previous footage. They're going to artificially age American flags and put them up there. They're going to build these ludicrous fucking lander kickstands because, the top part comes back. Again, just to visit the technology that would be required to pull this thing off is really, truly mind-numbingly, amazingly stupid that we believed that they could pull this off. In the quick, short time that they have. And I'll tell you, there's a few maneuvers that they were never able to test ever until they did it. The most delicate maneuver that I'm aware of is when the lunar module, the actual inhabitant's capsule, blasts off, okay, with some miraculous engine in it, with no propellant, goes back up to space. Again, there's very little gravity, supposedly. It's supposed to be 1/6 gravity, but if you, again, roll all the moon footage 2x, you'll find it's real time, which is not 1/6 gravity, right? They would have needed to overcrank the camera 6 times as fast as normal. So a film takes 24 frames per second to become animated in a movie theater at the time. So just think about that. We're talking almost 130 frames per second is how fast they would have to move the camera back in those days to really capture what 1/6 gravity might look like. But anyway, when this thing is going back up and attaching to the capsule to get the 2 astronauts back inside so they can turn around and fly home, that is a maneuver you can't practice anywhere on Earth. You can only practice it on the moon because you need the moon's gravity, you need the environment, and they never, ever fucked it up once. It just worked. And some people just, again, they have no technical aptitude, which is fine, but they just believe anything that they're told because they want to believe that. They believe in mathematics. They believe mathematics accounts for everything. Okay. Why don't you ask a general how far the plan goes for war? They strategize and strategize inside of computer simulations, and they win. But when they first fire the first bullet on that plan, the generals will tell you that the plan disappears. Oh, it's a general figmentation, it's generally going in that direction, but it's not going to happen the way that they simulated it in the Whopper computer. It's a general approximation. Well, let me ask you this question, let's put it that way. In this gigantic thing called space, okay, look up in the sky. How many planes would you have to fly over your house to get a collision? Quite a few. The inverse is correct in that if they made the tiniest little mistake in that little little rocket or whatever that took that little module and put it into space again off the moon surface, here comes the module, the capsule coming around to rendezvous with this thing. Can you imagine the absolute precision? And if they were off a micron, a nanosecond of trajectory, of angle, of degree, of thrust, if even the propellant inside the little rocket wasn't stacked up uniformly inside the rocket, a little sputter, a little would not put it in the place it's supposed to be. Or would put it in the place it's not supposed to be. And they would miss. But they never did they? It was picture perfect every single time. Okay. Smartest people in the whole universe, maybe, could pull that off? Not us. Okay? I mean, what's funny about it is you have cars at the same time probably getting an average of like 16 to 20 miles to the gallon. We hadn't even really put together seat belts as a mandatory thing. I mean, it was coming. I think in 73 or so, seat belts became mandatory. But we have junk technology all over the earth, and here they are inventing magic technology up there in space. All right, out of sight, out of mind. The lunacy, pardon the pun, of it all is ridiculous. And I think one of the reasons why those of us who follow it is because it's really disheartening to have adults, okay, tell you that we went to the moon and then try to tell you what political candidate you're supposed to vote for. To tell you anything about the world at all. Oh, okay, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, you believe in this complete bullshit, which means your ability to float yourself a bunch of crap, a bunch of lies, is pretty effortless. We know that you don't really care about what is true and what is false because you won't do a single bit of research in anything. And now everything you've ever told me for your entire life has to be flushed down the toilet. At a minimum, if I have some guttural bloodline respect for you, I might take some of what I'm about to flush down the toilet and put it in an evaluation pile over here to see, maybe they were able to hang on to some form of reality, or maybe they got some knowledge from a great grandparent of their own who actually did care about the truth. Maybe it was before propaganda ran the world, and so there are some tidbits there. But that's how fundamental this problem is, in my opinion. My preference is to catch them before it's all over. Because the nice thing is I think all the heads of state of NASA today have inherited the crime. And so there's a different type of evaluation, judicial process, and persecution for someone inheriting a crime. I don't think we have to go balls out on them. I don't think they have to be sentenced to jail for the rest of their life by any means. I think we just need to simply say, oh, okay, I see. You inherited the drug trafficking problem that the alphabet agencies created to fund themselves. And, obviously when you got the job, you didn't know what was going on, but they briefed you on your first day and told you what the consequences were if you were to reveal it. Hey, we get why you went along with it. We do. You can't exactly whistle blow if the next thing that's going to happen is your brains are splattered all over a wall. But in the 60s, okay, NASA conspired against the world, conspired against anyone paying tax dollars into the organization to lie to them. Now, it's not clear if they actually were intending on faking this thing from the very beginning when Kennedy said we should do it. I'm going to hold out, and maybe I'm naive, that wasn't the direct objective, that they were going to try and do it. I think they believed that the Russians were doing things that the Russians weren't doing. I'm not sure of all the claims that Russia made being true. First men in space, first woman in space, first 2 vehicles in space, first spacewalk, first satellite Sputnik seems fairly believable. We weren't able to move any aircraft that fast and beam stuff down to Earth. But I think it is interesting that the Russians probably could have leveraged their knowledge about what we did and faked a mission of their own. But they had a bit of a problem. I think they couldn't quite get the Saturn V type rocket that they were building, because they were building a massive goddamn rocket to get to the moon, and it was much more powerful than ours, right? Their boosters, again, were archived in 1973 in Siberia in a warehouse, and NASA asked permission to open that warehouse in 1995, and they bought those boosters and immediately found that they were 2.5 times more powerful than all the boosters that we had built up to 1995, people. The whole Saturn V hoax is based on the F1 booster, which schematics have never been revealed. They said they found some on the bottom of the ocean, but they won't reveal them to us, because kids can put them in simulation packages today and find out that they do not have the thrust that they said they did. The Russians had perfected a technique of basically creating a turbo such that the unspent fuel would go back into the rocket and be spent. So it was extremely efficient. And they didn't go. Now again, back to the idea that America innovates things really well. We innovate things really, really well, and I think we're going to innovate the next version of freedom in this planet. I think that's what we're doing right now. Europe is helping. Canada is helping. People from all around the world who are following the QAnon movement, again, regardless if this guy is telling the truth or not, which I definitely think he is, there is a movement to take over this planet from the bankers, put them away forever, restructure all law in the world such that it will become illegal to engage in usury. It will be illegal to engage in fiat currencies that are not controlled, completely transparent to the people, meaning debt versus interest, which should be not allowed. Compound interest should be absolutely outlawed around the world. It's called usury. It's horrible. Destroys lives. It's an impossible algorithm you can't possibly pay off. But the one thing we really don't talk about, which I want to use to close off this episode for a few tens of minutes, is how do we get there? How do we get to the moon? And is it important that we ever get to the moon? Right? There's, of course, folks that are flat earthers that believe that the moon is 3,200 miles up because that's what the sextant says it is, and the sun is also said to be 3,200 miles up with the sextant. Again, they're the same fucking size during a black hole sun eclipse, right? Pretty astronomically against, right? Random rock in space, random distance from other rock in space that's around a sun happens to be the exact size as the sun when eclipsed. I think that is so astronomically against, it is an IQ test for mankind. So how do we get there? Does society need to change first before we even attempt this whole thing? I would wager yes. And we're not there yet, so we can't just jump right in and fix this issue. We have to fix the fabric of man. Because I would say that integrity still isn't the most popular cologne in this world, is it? It needs to be. And I love the analogy of a cologne, because what that really means is you permeate this into the atmosphere. You have an aura, a smell of integrity, which means you tell the truth and your word is bond. Hey, you might accidentally say something that isn't true, but it's not because you're trying to deceive anyone. It's simply because you were misinformed or you made an assumption that didn't turn out to be correct. You still have integrity. You're trying. And to that effect that you make a mistake, to the extent you make a mistake, you go back to your constituents, the people that you had the discussion with, and you tell them, hey, I am very sorry, that didn't turn out to be true. I thought it was, and this is where I got my information, and this is why I was convinced that it was true, but it wasn't true. And you'll find people cut you slack. Now, obviously, if you make a huge habit of misreading everything in the world, you will most likely end up the Aesop fable, the boy who called wolf, right? So first and foremost, truth and integrity has to become the platform, the substrate of which society operates on. Every single second of every single day, we have to monitor that in each other. Doesn't mean you can't say a dirty word here and there. Just don't say it around a little kid or a woman if you can help it, right? Sorry, ladies. I hate to think that this is an old boys club, because it's not. But then we need what? We need a shit ton of technology to pull this thing off. First and foremost, we probably need to figure out these Van Allen belts, because even if we had zero gravity figured out, we still have to get some sort of capsule that can be protected against radiation. Well, I am going to cannibalize what has been said to have occurred on Mars, which I do not think any of it has actually occurred. No, I do not believe we have any satellites around Mars, nor do I think we have any rovers on Mars. I simply don't think we do. I think it's a combination of CG terrain technology, which has existed since the late 80s, early 90s. Again, I met two gentlemen that developed this for JPL in San Diego. Had a long conversation with them about it. With some bizarre nerd behind me who was an albino dressed in black leather with all kinds of Masonic rings on his fingers, and they said, and that guy still works for them right now, 40 years later. But they specifically said they developed terrain simulation technology starting in 1983. By 1984, they had developed spherical gas giant simulators for the movie 2010: A Space Odyssey, directed by Peter Hyams. And if you watch all of the making of that movie, you will find a reel that is actually shot inside GPL Labs with Jupiter on a monitor behind the guy, and it is beautiful. Now, it's not quite accurate to what we see in a telescope, but I'm sure the refinements have been made at this point. The reason why Saturn has a hexagon on the top is not because there's a fucking hexagon on Saturn, folks. It's because that rendering of Saturn is in a computer, and spherical algorithms weren't that great in the 80s, and so they made a mistake, and it has a hexagonal path for the light simulation, for its geometry, and they didn't correct it, so now they're trying to make excuses as to why that would occur. Disregard, disregard, disregard. It's all CG, folks. If one thing is certain, is that the alphabet agencies, and probably our government, has CG at a level that is absolutely photoreal. We know this already. You guys have seen videos posted by some of our listeners on the Lock Facebook group. They can simulate anyone's voice, anyone's face. It's all simulated. The whole thing is simulated. They could definitely play my face into the system and learn all my facial anomalies with sunglasses on, and then when they need to simulate me saying something to you, it's a flick of a switch. How many hours do they have of my voice? 400 hours? Easy. They got me down. I could be your next Siri in a fucking telephone, right? But we would send a probe to the moon before we would ever send a human being to the moon. Now, why wouldn't we do this in the 60s? Not quite sure. We definitely had remote control cars figured out by then. I mean, I had a little Trans Am in 1977 in my house. You know, so I'm sure the government figured that out. But today in 2018, it's no problem, right? We've got robot technology at a level that's insane in terms of traversing any terrain whatsoever. So us dropping a rover up there is the way to do it. Now, what they will do, if they ever do it in your lifetime, without dissolving NASA and admitting that the moon is a hoax, the moon missions were a hoax, is that they'll put that rover really far away from all the landing sites, because they can't possibly confirm that those landing sites don't exist. Just like the Mars missions, right? Most of you understand that there are pyramids on the surface of Mars. At least if any of the original satellites, the Viking missions or whatever they were, went over there and looked down, which may not have occurred, people. Maybe that whole thing is fake. But if everything that they've told us is true, they wouldn't have put these rovers in the most boring goddamn places on Mars. They wouldn't have put it on they won't try to land it right on top of pyramids, because that would be too, dangerous. So you find a nice clearing, some 100-mile square clearing, where you can drop this thing. It's just flat surface, and there it is. It lands, and you wake it up, and you move around. But you make a beeline straight for the most amazing things on Mars. We never see that, do we? Right? I mean, just think about it. In 10 years, we've had drone technology take off on a level that no one ever saw coming. So now if you send a probe to Mars, if it's really going on, GPL, you'd have a drone on top that's maybe covered up most of the time, and it can do a little mission. It flies out, does a bunch of surveying, and it knows how to come right back, just like a bee back to the nest, lands, vibrates itself and gets off all the dust. In fact, the drone could use its power to rinse off all of the iron dust off of the unit if you design it properly. Yeah, it would take a long time to charge, probably, maybe. Christ, the sun does come up, right? Like the days are 1/3 the size, or 1/3 the length, or something like that. Can't remember. But the moon is always exposed to the sun now, isn't it? Okay. So it wanes, it waxes. In the waxing phase, it's going to get a tremendous amount of power, and they could fly all over that place. The fact that they went to Mars instead of back to the moon, as I've said in previous episodes, is your smoking gun. They never went to the moon in the first place. Of course you would try your new Mars technology out on the moon. Of course you would. That would be the first thing out of your fucking mouth, right? If you're building a new boat, you've never built a boat before in your life, where would you test it? Would you test it in a pond first? Probably. Maybe even a bathtub, a swimming pool of sorts, just to see if your hull works. Does it displace water enough to create buoyancy? Yes, it does. Great. Let's put it in the pond. Try to go across the pond. Oh, it worked. Great. Now we're going to try to put more shit in it to figure out how much this hull can through the ratio of displacement of water towards the weight, the cargo that can go inside. We've tested it on a lake. Then we tested in a fairly calm ocean. Maybe put it across the channel between England and France, right? 11 miles or whatever that is. And then, only then, once all the data comes back and it's great, we push it over the Pacific or the Atlantic. Probably Atlantic first because it's shorter, which is what we did. That's how technology works. We do not go to the moon before we go across the Pacific. We don't. And that's what going to Mars was all about before we went to the moon. Now again, as long as someone knows something that you don't, you tend to believe it. Especially if they can explain it to you in a way that seems plausible, right? And that word is very dangerous, okay? There's plausibility. Now, how many of you have stood out at night and looked at the stars, and then you find these really bright things, and you start looking up on your telephone with the little astronomy app, and you realize you're looking at Venus, you're looking at Mars. Again, some of you don't believe these things are what they say they are, and I'm right there with you in terms of possibility there. But you build a gigantic rocket on Earth, and you send it over the Atlantic Ocean, and before it reaches, 100 miles up, it's already lost virtually all of its vertical ascent. It is now hugging the Earth in orbit, and of course they've created this slingshot theory. The cameras never, ever, ever stay on, do they? There's this weird blackout phase that doesn't need to happen, okay? It doesn't need to happen. We don't need to be missing one frame of a launch. All that's bullshit. It's to create a narrative switch from real-life rocket that's actually potentially going somewhere in a plausible argument to a computer simulation that NASA provides in the feed. But they never track a camera all the way to Mars. For those old folks that think there's not enough film in the camera to do that, okay, digital cameras don't have any film. All they do is transmit back to Earth. And hey, if there's a moment where we're behind the moon or we've rotated out of receivability of this thing, which is not true because there's stations all over the world, and no matter how it rotates, we're always got something that can listen to whatever direction an object is going in space. It would buffer in memory the missing frames, which doesn't cost much, okay? I'm filming right now in 4K. These episodes I could go 2 hours on this stick. It's a 128 gig stick. Okay, I think NASA can afford terabytes of sticks of RAM on these cameras. So even if it's off for a week, there's no problem filming 4K and sending it all back to us using the energy it has on it. You could use its nuclear power plant, which is a bunch of isotope rods that put off electric clouds that are translated into electromagnetic energy, or just using solar panel technology. Whatever, or some zero-point thing that we don't even know exists, right? But they don't want you to see the full journey. And why don't they want you to see that? Because the math doesn't actually work. Throwing an object at a little dot in space, no matter how accurate you think the astronomy technology is, or the mathematics of where things are in space at any one point in time, you're talking about a unit that barely has any propellant left after it is going in its orbital rendezvous with this body in space. Now again, the moon is a lot easier because it's really, really close. You can see the thing the whole time. We could just put a sensor on the front of a rocket with a little bit of fuel that it just, point at the brightest thing in the sky and keep the retros always pointed at it, and you could deduce some sort of orbital approach, right? But Mars is a planet, people, okay? And it's hauling ass around the sun. A lot different than the moon. Just the differential for how fast we shoot a rocket and how fast Mars is going around the sun should give you an idea of how hard it is to get a bullet going 1 mile an hour to orbit a car going 190 miles an hour, right? It's never going to match up. It's never going to orbit the other one because it doesn't have enough speed to do it. Our satellite has to be going the same speed as the orbit of Mars in order to achieve any form of orbit. It just does. But what do they call these people, right? What's the career that pretty much levels anybody in the room from arguing with the other individual? Astrophysicist. My God, man, it's hard to say it, man. Okay, Jethro. So there's sort of a shock and awe at the career itself. There's a shock and awe at the amount of mathematics these individuals do understand. And you don't understand it. There we have created the barrier of intellectual capacity to conceive of what the other person is claiming. How many times, again, as I mentioned on the show, you hear someone say something to the effect of, well, did you know there's like 30 dimensions of space and time? Oh, really? Where'd you get that, man? I read it in a magazine. First, I read it in Newsweek. Well, how long was the article, man? Oh, it was at least a quarter page. Oh, great. Did you see all the mathematics that theorized this into existence? Well, no, I don't understand that kind of stuff, but this really smart fella figured it out. Boom. Now that smart fella, right? That was it, smart feller, fart smeller? He can now bullshit you left and right. And hey, it's not a bad thing to theorize these things and see if you do come up with some legitimate parsing of existence, and we can find the simulator owners and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, great. But I've been listening to this shit for 35, 40 years. It has never evolved, right? This gets revisited over and over and over. Never amounts to anything. The latest hoorah of complete lunacy is the CERN Hadron Collider and the Higgs boson God particle, right? The multiverse people and the single verse people finding the frequency directly between their two algorithms. I mean, seriously. If you believe that, then you have been recently had, right? Who knows what that thing is really trying to do? Official story is everyone should be in jail who put it together because they based it on theories that were over 50 years old, right? No one ever went back to school and learned anything new. They took old-ass theories, Big Bang theories of all things, right? With 3 of the 4 colliders in the CERN Hadron Collider were looking for Big Bang evidence. Really? Did you find the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus at the same time? Why don't we build a Hadron Collider for that? Why don't we do a big Arctic mission to find Santa Claus's lair up there, and let's grab Superman while we're at it, right? This is what we've been boiled down to. And I think it boils down to something that we can say is life imitates art way too much at this point. And why is that? And it's actually a healthy algorithm up to a point. You must be inspired to go and find reality. Those of you who want to be enlightened in the world, you have to be inspired to be enlightened. It's just something that has to occur. Everyone who ate those mushrooms under pine trees, it's got that big name I can never remember, but it's the red ones with the white polka dots that are always seen with gnomes, because everyone's tripping balls and seeing gnomes at the same time after they eat these things. They were enlightened through serendipitous chemical modifications to their mortal coil. I think it's interesting, whoever created the human body made it possible to do that. And it's perhaps that whole thing I did in episode 2 about the visual cortex being ganked by a layer of cells that says you can only use 20% of your visual cortex to see the universe. What happens when we... I think it's 10%, sorry. What happens when we can use the other 90%? What do we see? Do we see the stuff that people see when they take DMT? There's other aliens around. Maybe we're not even on a ball. Maybe we're in some consensus reality, as I've talked about in other episodes. I recently went down this path with a friend of mine about the moon, and I haven't gone down that path in years, probably a year or two, where someone was like, oh, but this, but that, but this. We know we went because of this, but that. And again, I told this guy, I said, look, man, I was debriefed by 2 people from NASA that we didn't go, who were on the Mars mission, who went and tried to look up what happened with the moon so they would have a base platform to get to Mars, and were officially told, one of them was officially told, look, we didn't go. You can get your paycheck between now and the day you die. We'll never go to Mars, so don't worry about it. They were wrong in that particular estimate because they figured out a way to hoax the whole thing together with these probes, these landers, these little rover things. But that just went in one ear and out the other, like I was lying to the guy. Didn't really have any interest in hearing how they faked it. I did manage to get a couple things out. Not sure they ever stuck, but he was all stuck on the mirror. The mirror on the moon surface is the proof that we went to the moon. And I said, well, do you realize that they've been bouncing lasers off the moon before the mirror ever existed? Ooh, White face. Let's go ahead and change the subject there, buddy. This guy's younger than me. Younger than me. Still hanging on to that old patriotic bunch of horse shit that we went. So, let's say we get the world on a substrate of truth, and they actually research, and it's a requirement to utter anything in conversation to another human being. Oh, really? I haven't heard of that. It's not common knowledge. Okay, you've made the claim. Now I need you to back up and tell us where you got all your information. I don't care if it came from YouTube or the internets or your buddy in college or your own laboratory experiments. I just need to know where you got this and what your logic path is for saying you believe this. And then we'll all in the room can make our own choice as to whether or not we believe it. But doesn't that sound like a reasonable path to knowledge? But then you have this patriotic layer on top. The layer that keeps everyone defending these hoaxes. And I mean, this is a sort of a positive hoax besides Gus Grissom and his two buddies getting murdered in the Apollo 1. Other than that, and probably several dozen other people that wanted to tell the story, tell the truth, that we're unaware of, this patriotic stuff creates death, doesn't it? There's a problem that we have in society today, and it's something that QAnon has alluded to, which is that we have pedophiles all over the world. And in very prestigious positions. They're presidents, chancellors, prime ministers. They are politicians. They're police officers. They're military people. They're Hollywood people. They're the people down the street as well. But when it comes to government, like they'll bust the guy down the street, no problem. Because they can push that in the press. They can either hide it in the press so it never gets reported, or they can push it in the press as that one guy that does that one bad thing. But when it comes to political officials doing it, the Catholics who do it constantly, right? Catholics are a fucking plague. The priests and the bishops and all these people, they're a fucking plague on society. On average, since I've been alive, they rape your kids. They just do. I'm not making it up. It's in the press constantly, right? Never any fucking persecution for these people. The Vatican just paid off $3 billion in settlements. I would say that's a first good step, to be honest. But they need to stop this mess going on around the world, and I don't have any faith that that's occurred. I think within the next 10 years, we're going to find another priest, another bishop, somewhere in the world that between this episode and 2018, and when we find out that news, the guy has raped 500 kids or done something inappropriate. How is that allowed to happen? Because there's a patriotism, on religion. They're basically too big to rape your kids. They're too big to ever be persecuted for what they do to your kids. Is that the world you want to live in? Seriously? I'll give you another digression away from the moon. I apologize, but this is part of the fabric. If we ever want this thing to happen, we can't just focus on SNS and SpaceX. We've got to focus on ourselves first. We absolutely have to. How many people are shitty to other people on this planet? They step on your head to get ahead. They lie, they cheat, and they steal. And one way or another, maybe it's not a bank heist steal, but they take your money, they say they're going to pay you back, and they never do. But you see them with money later on, where they could have paid you back, and they never did. People who lie and, they lie. They lie about infidelity, they lie about what they're going to do for you, that they support you, or whatever. They're going to be there for you when you need them. And what has it been up to this point without the internet? I think without the internet, we haven't had any option to expose these people for exactly what they are. And so they get to go back into society. You break up with them, you divorce them, whatever, you sever your business partnership with them, and they get to go out and run their scam until the day they die, just like these pedophiles of old that get to die, like Jimmy Savile, having done everything that he ever wanted to do, and he's never going to get prosecuted. I will assure you that any family on this planet that has laws that protect them from being prosecuted, we have to look very deep into their past, into their lifestyle, to make sure they don't have this sort of activity. What was it? The guy that tried to drive his car into, I believe, the King of Norway? think that's where it was. I apologize if I had that wrong, but there's a video of a guy trying to drive his car at a public appearance, and they stopped him. And as they're pulling him out the car, he says, "They're killing our children. Help me stop them." Interesting. Interesting. I think it was the King and Queen of Norway, one of their presidential palaces or royal palaces, the grounds, they found like 7 to 12 kids' bodies buried in the back of one of their lots. Yeah, I guess maybe some farmer down the street's doing it and burying it on royal land just to screw them over. Maybe. They couldn't, as far as I understood the story, they couldn't determine whether it was 7 or 12 because they were just bones. Still trying to figure it out. I'm sure they could. My feeling today is that we have to be very careful letting these people go. You don't want to get all caught up in revenge and all the negativity, but I think it might just be interesting to just publish a statement about your life with this individual and say, this is what I experienced with that individual. Maybe they change. Maybe they become a better person. I guarantee you if they're in their 40s and still doing it, and they've always done it since they were teenagers or whatever, chances are they'll probably continue screwing everybody else. And yeah, there are these social media apps that are going to be, it's already being started in China, where you have to obey the law of China, otherwise you get a down arrow and that stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the old-fashioned scarlet letter for individuals who lie. How many people in America right now in politics are being busted for lying? The Rod Rosensteins, the Muellers, the Strauchs, the Pages. They're all getting away scot-free because Obama pardoned them before he left. They're all being arrested, and then they pull out this piece of paper and go, I was pardoned. They're pardoned in the pedestrian public eye, but they're not pardoned in a military tribunal manner, which is why John McCain was put to death. You can expect a lot more of that, people. And that's America creating freedom 2.0. Hopefully we succeed, because if we succeed, your standards will go up around the world. What is acceptable will have its bar lifted considerably. If we achieve this, then we'll have the fabric of society that we need in order to get to the moon, to get to Mars, to figure out where the hell we are. So that pedestrians can fly over the South Pole and convince themselves it's either a round ball or they're going to bang into some fucking barrier. And it's some simulation of a ball. It's made to look like a ball, but we're actually in some firmament dome because we have captors. Maybe we're on a big giant planet, which makes the size of the moon make sense, but we've never seen 98% of it because that's being run by the people that drive by in UFOs. UFOs exist, don't they? They exist. Now, maybe the majority of UFOs are all, plasma balls coming out of the bowels of the earth, spinning, creating a chrome sphere or a chrome disk, and then they hit negative pockets in the atmosphere and they zip-zap at 4,000 miles. Maybe if a jet pursues it, it modifies the atmosphere and thus gives it the natural means of flying away. But maybe they're really UFOs from time to time. Intelligent beings inside ships that aren't necessarily of our human nature. I mean, maybe they're human. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're little gray aliens. Don't know. But that's being coveted and hidden from society. And society, of all things, has the right to know the truth, don't we? How many times have you heard the narrative of a new technology that's invented? Like Tesla, he invented all kinds of cool shit. When he dies, it's all harvested. Again, don't forget Donald Trump's uncle, who was the, head physicist at MIT, was told to go get the information out of Tesla's apartment. And then it's all weaponized by the government. Now, that guy in particular probably had nothing to do with it, but he was the one that was deemed the most intelligent person that the FBI had access to go in and take a look and discern what is valuable and what is not. But we currently, in Freedom 1.0, we haven't written enough laws to protect our freedoms in specific cases that are now apparent in 2018, right? So we have to have a revisal of our Constitution of the United States in America to outlaw compound interest, to redefine the parameters of national security. We have to specifically talk about things like UFOs. And specifically offer a region of the community. If you want to join this particular community, let's just say you want to stay a Catholic and you want to be blissfully ignorant of child rape and all the other things that happen. You don't want to believe that UFOs exist because you think that defeats your belief in God and Jesus Christ and all this other stuff. Fine, you can stay in your little compound somewhere, but a big part of us, an infinite part of us, can go into the other sector and learn the truth about S4, Area 51, UFOs, all the footage, all the contact with the Greys from the Roswell crash. We can do this. And if any of you are rolling your eyes about Roswell, believe me, I have sympathy. You haven't seen my Roswell episode. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Go to the deepthoughtsradio.com, put in the search field Roswell. And listen to my episode on it, because I went in trying to debunk that thing hardcore, was convinced my entire life that it was bullshit, and by the time I was done, I was utterly convinced that it did occur. I'm not convinced of other ones. I'm not. But that one I am entirely convinced that it happened. So I think we have been visited. I think that's very important information, and I think that would sway the very fabric of society. And I'm not talking about the George Bush or the Ronald Reagan more speech about us all uniting under one front and getting into a new world order. We're not ready for that step whatsoever. Sorry, Jim Carrey. Well, that guy's turned into a fucking piece of work, hasn't he? God damn. I would like to see us get to the moon. Whether it be a rover or a human being, I would like to see us get there. Whether it be a tiny little ball 3,200 miles up in space, which would be really interesting, or if it's a true big-ass rock in space, it was a 1,200 mile diameter, I want to see what's up there. If there are UFOs, and there's a lot of folks that believe this is true, then we believe that they have touched base on the moon. Some people like John Lear believe there's bases on the dark side of the moon. Hey, maybe. I don't know. I'm not convinced with any of the photographic evidence he submitted that that's the case. But it'd be a great place to look because it hasn't been touched by mankind for goddamn sure. The amount of evidence against having gone to the moon is just ever growing, ever conclusive, ever smoking gun. It is. Again, when you have to argue with folks about this, their research is shit. Their evidence is shit. It is. It's horrible. It is right out of a fucking coffee table book that you would buy at Barnes & Noble. It's awful. I have never, ever, ever been challenged by someone saying we did go to the moon who didn't concede by the end of the conversation, if they were participating in the conversation, let's just say, that we didn't go. Including, again, 2 other people from NASA that I talked to probably in the last 15 years who called me a name at the beginning of the conversation indirectly, and within, I'm telling you, within 2 minutes, I think even 60 seconds, I had these guys reeling back and laughing that I knew we didn't go. And to save their own intelligence quota with me, they admitted that they don't think we went either. And that, of course, we didn't go. Okay, one of them said that. One of them went from, anyone who doesn't believe this is just an asshole, to, of course we didn't go. Isn't that funny? I met another gentleman who worked for Teller, the H-bomb inventor. When we went to the moon, he just shrugged and was like, well, of course, that was a bunch of bullshit. Of course. We were creating ICBMs and missiles. That's what that whole project was all about. I was like, you know then. He was like, fuck yeah, I know. I had a little Masonic ring on too. It was really interesting. At some point, for those of you who believe this is a simulation, I have to agree in that in my own journeys, what's really weird is that I will have these people come to me. Either in 1991, when I had the serendipitous meeting with 2 colleagues of mine in the company I work for, tell me we didn't go with all the specifics, to bumping into Bart Sabrell's movies, to then having 2 gentlemen sat down in front of me, like the guy who knew both of us said, you 2 have to talk, boom, sits me down and I have these conversations. The Teller guy, I just bumped into in the public. And then, within seconds, we're having this conversation. And I don't believe I ever asked him about his ring. I just saw it. And he was very brilliant, this guy. So if you're listening to this video, maybe I am one of your folks that's there to nudge you in a direction that your mind is ready to go. And again, most of you, I shouldn't say most of you, I think most of you already have a belief that we didn't go in the first place. Only a couple butthurt people come in and try to debunk with, again, just the horrible NASA.gov debunking web pages, which I don't know if they exist anymore. I think NASA kind of pulled out of it because they do understand that at this point in society, kids have engineering apps just as accurate as NASA, and we can put boosters inside simulations, run fuel through them, all the combustion's taken care of. Everything that an F1 booster would do in real life can be simulated inside of average college engineering software. So they can't allow those designs to ever be published. I don't know it for a fact, but I would wager money that at some point in NASA's history, they've sat down a group of scientists to say, okay, can you re-engineer the F1 booster with now what we know about Russian technology? We can't use the Russian technology because we've admitted we didn't have it. But can you do our singular engine and try to figure out how to make the moon missions work? And I'm sure they deliberated and they put time in. They realized not even close, dude. We can't even. The best thing to do is not even touch the subject anymore. Just let them fight it out online. I don't know what the grand plan is to admonish NASA from all responsibility, SpaceX. But we'll have to wait for that plan B to come around. Probably designed by, again, attorneys that don't want to have to deal with they would have no problem actually charging NASA for the legal time, but they don't want their client to go down the tubes, having to admit this stuff didn't happen and then incur all of the expenses and litigation thereof. Let me give you an analogy I'll close this thing off with. For those of you who have been in a difficult relationship in your lifetime, it could be a personal one where I'm talking about your spouse or your boyfriend, girlfriend, or it could just be a business relationship or a relationship with a friend. At one point, this person was ideal for you. Spending time was very rewarding and very compatible. Again, however that occurred. But then you grew apart, and they became very chaotic and crazy. Maybe they became an alcoholic, a drug user. Maybe they just started becoming schizophrenic or whatever. Psychopathic, right? But you still have a little bit of communication with them and you have credibility with them. And so what you're trying to do is figure out the one thing that you can mention to them, some pattern that you think that they don't enjoy of their own life, right? They're self-destructive in a particular sequence of their life. And so you're thinking, maybe if I can make them aware of the self-destructive thing that they're doing, they'll wake up and handle all the bigger agendas or the like agendas that destroy their life and thus your time with them, right? The moon missions being a hoax, for America at least, okay, we could put it all on NASA's back, but I think it's good for the entire country of America. This is our thing. The moon missions are a thing that we can mention and say, look, guys, we are not one person. We are an entire country with the idea of freedom. We're currently living off version 1.0. We need to get to 2.0. The Great Awakening is 2.0, but it hasn't solidified into laws and statutes that will re-fortify the concepts of freedom. So the moon missions are a place we can look and say, this is how your government can lie to you. This is how Hollywood can make movies to continually reinforce the revised history of these moments. And by no means is it the only history being revised. We all know that, okay? But since we vote on our leaders, and I think the vote's being protected more than ever, we have to get George Soros out of our fucking voting machines and out of politically influencing as a foreign dignitary, or whatever the fuck he is. We're trying to figure out whether or not he has U.S. citizenship because he's from Hungary. He probably does. But we have to use this as a leverage point to fix society, to fix the world. And there's many others, but this is a nice, comfortable one that is not as acidic as some of them out there. Again, there have been deaths. But that's why from time to time I'll mention it to people who are willing to listen. Now today what's funny is most people believe that I run into, they don't have a big problem believing that it was a fake. Even folks that I tell for the very first time, kids in their early 20s, that I kind of run it down because they're spouting this stuff and they go, oh yeah, right. Oh my gosh, that's so silly. Why did I ever think this was real? Well, I don't blame you, kid. I did too when I was young. Hell, I believed probably until this century that it was real. Till Bart Sabrell repeated what my friends told me in 91. If you haven't seen the other 2 episodes, I suggest you go see them. I'll put them in the comments section if I can remember. I'm actually pretty horrible about that because it takes days and days to get these things edited and out the door. I think you feel me. Please leave your comments in the section below on YouTube if you can. A lot of thinking going on here. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. We have video, audio, locked Facebook group, and a Patreon page. As always, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.